Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the next hour as we discuss how a diverse workforce operating in an inclusive culture can serve as a stimulus to drive greater business value and deliver a competitive edge to businesses. My name is Andy Tay. I am a Senior Managing Director with Accenture and responsible for our Accenture AWS partnership. I'm super excited to be here at the 10th reInvent, representing Accenture as co-sponsors for the inaugural All Builders Welcome track. Super excited to be here, and thank you again for joining us. We are indeed in an era of hyper-competitiveness, and clients that we work with are under severe pressure to transform at pace in what we call compressed transformation. And as this sort of industry disruption and transformation accelerates, companies are increasingly seeking a durable competitive edge. And we know that it's in people that we get the best and greatest value that really drive that sort of difference in getting the value. And winners of tomorrow are increasingly embedding diversity, inclusion, and equity at the very core of what they do every single day in order to redefine their experiences with their customers, their partners, and their employees, in order to help redefine the products they make, how they service those products, where they sell those products, and in order to drive greater value. An indication, growing indication, suggests that it is this embedding of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the very core of what these winners of tomorrow are doing that's enabling them to thrive and be sort of those winners of tomorrow. And so we're going to discuss that, how this is an enabler, this sort of setup of a diverse workforce operating in a culture of inclusivity and with equity. I'm super excited today to be joined by three dynamic speakers, and we're super keen for you to walk away with understanding that value and to be empowered and energized to take that back to your companies and continue to drive for greater DEI initiatives. We're super excited for you to better understand how we collectively as leaders can serve as culture makers in driving and enabling a culture. And we're super excited for you to perhaps learn through the discussion over the next hour how diversity, equity, and inclusion is really the enabler for this durable competitive edge. Let me turn it now to these fantastic leaders. I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves and then to share one thing about this week that they're super looking forward to for this reInvent week. Jason, let me start with you on the far side.
Thanks, Andy. Jason Bennett. I'm the general manager for our business here in the US West. I lead our sales, go-to-market business development teams. We're primarily focused on our enterprise, ISV, and digital customers. To your point, what am I most excited for on this 10th reInvent? I'd probably say it's not incredibly different than what I've been excited for at every reInvent past, which is to hear about the stories, or hear the stories of how our customers are leveraging AWS to make their lives different for their employees and for their customers. I think that is something that has been consistent at every single reInvent.
Thanks, Jason. Marykay.
Hi, I'm Marykay Wells. I am the CIO at Pearson Education. Pearson is one of the largest education companies in the world. We have professional services and we service higher ed, English language learning, and a lot of other education-related areas. What I am most excited about, and maybe I missed this question, but I think it's better if you answer it off the cuff anyways, is really, first thing was seeing my team, some of the people that came from our team. We haven't seen each other in 2 years, and especially for those of us that aren't in the same geography. So it's great just to, I had an hour with them so far today. It was absolutely fantastic. I am so interested in listening and learning about what AWS is doing with things like on the business performance side, like the AWS Connect and things like that. So really going beyond the infrastructure services and seeing how we could really leverage the capability that AWS is offering.
Super, thanks, Marykay. Penelope.
Well, first off, thanks for having all of us, Andy. I'm Penelope Prett. I'm the CIO of Accenture, which is a professional services company. And Mr. Tay here is one of my customers. And they certainly, in a professional services company, don't hesitate to let you know how you're doing very vocally and very often. So I'm fortunate to have over 600,000 employees who give me feedback every day on how things are going. As the CIO for Accenture, I have two primary responsibilities. One is to keep the technology landscape up, running, quiet, and productive, right? So everybody can do all the wonderful things that they do for clients. But secondly, I am responsible for actively innovating against technologies that will be used in the market somewhere from 2 to 3 years from now. So we want to identify those, pull them down into Accenture, actually make them run and work at an enterprise level, have all of our client account teams, like the one Andy leads, use those capabilities so that when they come to talk to you in the market, they've been there, done that, and got the t-shirt, right? And it's a lot of fun. We get to deal with everyday tech, but we also get to play with some really futuristic stuff, and Amazon helps us with that, and we have a good time. The one thing out of this week that I've been thrilled to hear so far, and I think you're going to hear a lot more about it over the next couple of days, is the concept of speed. I've been in the IT business more than 2 decades, coming up on 3, right? And the speed at which we can achieve outcomes and drive change has fundamentally altered, more so in the last 5 years than in the 25 years that came before. So I'm excited to listen to what all of our brethren from Amazon are going to bring us that's going to allow us to go faster, be more agile, be more secure, and deliver value to market in half or less the time than we used to be able to do it.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for being here. Really, really honored to be on stage with you. I failed to answer the question as well myself, and I think I'm with Marykay in the time we'll have this week in meeting some of our team members who we haven't seen for a number of years because of COVID. And I do also want to make note that due to policy, we will be putting on and off our masks. So just know that as we answer and ask questions, our masks will be coming on and off. Let's kick it off. We're going to point, Jason, to you for the first question. Jason, we've heard a lot about how DEI and various DEI initiatives can drive value and sort of give companies a bit of an edge and greater benefits. And I wonder, you lead a large sector in real thriving business, AWS. How are you in your business implementing DEI? In what ways are DEI initiatives or IDE initiatives driving value in your business?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So I'd say there's a couple ways. And the first thing I would say is, first off, if we think about, when we think about what is an edge, we think about the value back to our organization, what we're really talking about is delivering outcomes for our customers. We work backwards from our customers. And so what I would say is inherent in that is making sure that you actually have the right perspective for your customer. That's really challenging to do when we talk about large organizations, because the perspective of an organization isn't one person, it's a collection of people. And so when we really think about how do we align, part of the benefit of having a diverse organization and diverse teams is that we have a better understanding of our customers. We actually bring more empathy to our discussions with our customers. We see our customers in different lights, different personas that are inside of that organization. A perfect example. So there was a logistics and trucking company that we were working with. This was a few years ago. where they were really starting down the pathway of what was a pretty large transformation for their organization. And one of the things they were hearing often was that their customers were looking for a different sort of experience. They wanted to receive freight faster. They wanted to be able to understand what the temperature was, vibration readings, a bunch of different things that were sort of there. The pieces could be brought together to deliver that for them. And the discussions that we had for probably the first couple of months were really more about technology. It was about the underlying platform, the tools, getting rid of technical debt. And it probably would have stayed that way if we weren't fortunate enough to have someone on the team that, it's interesting, this individual had actually been at AWS for only about a year at that point, and they were not recently out of college, but they had a background. Their dad was actually someone that had worked out in the shipping yards. And what was really interesting is he started asking a set of questions about the experiences and the impact of this change outside of just the IT organization, outside of just finance and the impact of switching from CapEx to OpEx. And what that really allowed the customer to do, and us with them, was to see around a bunch of corners for them. They started thinking about a set of things and the impact of the changes that they would make. So I see that as a really tangible example of the impact of diversity in an organization. And the value that we get is it helps us show up better for our customers.
Jason, thanks for that. It's great insight. I like the working backwards and having a workforce that can understand and empathize with what the client's looking for. Penelope, I wonder, you touched on Accenture being, north of 600,000 people, and therefore you've got a fairly significant, broad, global customer base. Mm-hmm. In what ways are you seeing DEI show up in terms of driving value in everything that you and your team drive?
The first thing I note is the diversity is a much broader term than typically a lot of the initiatives that you even see about or participate in, whether your initiatives are related to race or gender or whatnot. Diversity relates to diversity of thought, right? Because anybody who hasn't read enough of the market research out there right now to know for a fact that diversity of thought results in better rounded products that more people find useful and delightful, they're living under a rock. The research is there, right? HBR has some great articles if you have 5 minutes to go look. When we think about diversity of thought, it means as a leader, even if your team is 5 people, my team is over 10,000 people, you have to be very deliberate about assembling the team in a way that brings multiple points of diverse thought to the table. And Jason, that was a great one, right? Diverse thought from what your background was, how you grew up. But it can also be as simple as diverse thought from how many years a person has been out in the workforce. The thing I'd ask you to remember, I dated myself when I said I've been in business this long. I didn't come from a digital background. When I came up, we still had rotary telephones. The first cell phone I had was a bag you carried around as big as a Louis Vuitton purse, right? And today's generations of people entering the workforce have literally been digitally fluent since they were infants. They grew up with technology in a very different way than I did. And I want to make sure that I have my viewpoint represented at the table, but I want to be equally sure I have all of those viewpoints represented at the table, because it's not good enough for me to serve one segment. I've got 600,000 plus people, 147 countries, all age groups, every race, religion, and creed you can imagine, and they all have to find what I bring forward delightful and useful. And I'm not going to get there unless I have all of them represented at the table, and I'm not going to do that unless I as a leader pay attention to it and make it happen by making the right development programs, by pulling forward the right leaders with the right profiles, and by making sure that every person in my department can look at the leadership table and see somebody whose career they can identify with and want to emulate.
Thanks, Penelope. I really like the point about a diversity of thought, particularly when you've got a fairly significant client base or customer base. And I know in the industry that many of you will be in, there's a broad customer base, and having a mindset with that sort of diversity of thought is super important to driving value. Marykay, if I can just maybe turn to you. DEI is clearly a difference maker, as we've heard from Jason and Penelope. But before we can maybe get going in seeing some of the value, you've got to attract the talent. and we're obviously in a fairly, aggressive, talent war out there. And I wonder, Pearson's a leading company, but what are some of the things that you're doing to attract the talent and then empower the talent to sort of operate in a free way to be able to innovate, to drive value?
Yeah, so when I joined Pearson 7 years ago, it was really considered and still is by some, a publishing company. Yes, people know they went to universities, they got textbooks, and they were from Pearson. And the type of individuals that we needed to attract were people that came out of school that could provide, how do you want to learn from a digital perspective? And so what we've had to do is look at a number of different ways to really attract that talent. So one is we had probably an average tenure of, when I came in, between 15 and 20 years. So people had been there a long time in the publishing business. They'd been very successful. And so what we needed to do is really look at how can we really reflect who we're selling to and who's using our products, and really look at how we attract some of those individuals so that we can get good feedback. So what we did is, what we found is it's much, to put in a job description or a job form to say, I'm attracting and open to all backgrounds isn't good enough. Mm-hmm. I think you need to really identify with what you've actually done. And one of the things that we have pointed out is we've had very successful ERGs, employee resource groups, and for LGBTQ and so forth, we've actually been identified in Forbes, won awards. We've had around our ABLE group, which is our really focus on our disabled. We've actually done a pledge. We reference those things when we come in and we speak to people. And that really works upon the individuals that really want to come to the company because of the mission. And that's been a tremendous factor in being able to attract good talent from people that were really aligned with the mission.
Marykay, thanks for that. I think, and I agree with you, this sort of attraction by mission is a massive differentiator. I mean, we're seeing talent has choice, and companies that have the right mission tend to sort of serve as a massive attraction area for people to go to. Penelope, if I was to sort of turn, perhaps, the talent has been attracted, that they're in, that they're sat in their seats perhaps, but now we've got to sort of empower and light up the engine, so to speak. And we've got to create an inclusive environment where people are empowered to share their diversity of thought. Indeed, I've heard of this sort of perception gap where, between what leaders think is happening on the ground mm-hmm. and what is actually happening on the ground. And I wonder, what are some of the things Accenture is doing to sort of have an inclusive environment that helps close this perception gap?
So the easiest way to find out what people actually want, Andy, is to ask them and to listen when they talk to you, right? But in today's world, with things moving so fast, the standard asking tool is a survey, and surveys are boring, and we get an okay response rate, but not terrific because they're boring, and people don't want to engage with you in a boring fashion. So you really have to find new ways to listen, and listen involves two-way communication, and you have to encourage people to speak. So let me give you a couple of specific examples of things that we do that really help. Our CEO, Julie Sweet, as you know, because I'm sure you've attended at least one, She has a quarterly forum called Ask Me Anything, and she invites every single person in the firm, and any person of any level can submit any question, and she groups and themes them and answers them as best she can, directly talking to the people, allowing two-way feedback in some cases. So listening to the population, asking them what's of interest, and then answering those questions so they understand mission does have quite a bit to do with it. We hear a lot about where's the company going, I need to feel something, a part of something that's bigger than me, right? Me doing fine is great, but if I'm not making an impact socially and economically around the world, then I'm really not achieving my potential as an employee, and you need to unleash it for me to be able to do that. So the Ask Me Anything sessions with Julie are one way. We're also looking into some interesting ways of gathering information about what people aren't willing to talk about or aren't willing to say. Because even in the best world, people can fear reprisal, or they can be shy, or they can just not generally feel comfortable talking about things. And this is where a lot of the work around today's analytics sets begins to come into play. Things like workplace analytics from Microsoft, for example. There's a ton of data out there, but as leaders, one of the things that you're going to have to wrestle with is what's the right division line between learning about how a person is doing by looking at the data that surrounds them versus invading their privacy. And we have a lot of questions, that we constantly chew through about how best to observe the data of a company as large as we are without ever stepping into that privacy space or making anybody feel like they're giving up information they don't want to give up. So in short, listen, but constantly look for new ways using the data analytic capabilities that are coming from all these great ecosystem partners to listen to what's not being said as well. Don't leave that part of the picture out.
That's a really important point. Asking the question, listening, and then sometimes people tend to miss what's not being said, which has actually allowed a voice for the gap. So thank you for sharing that. Jason, Penelope touched on sort of a couple of mechanisms, in terms of creating this inclusive environment, this inclusive culture for people to feel empowered, free, being able to sort of engage and innovate. But it's not easy. It's tough, it's hard yards, and it takes work. And I wonder, would you share perhaps some of the most difficult parts in terms of creating this sort of culture of inclusion?
Sure. Yeah, I'd actually go back to something Marykay mentioned, the focus on hiring and thinking about what are the practices that you drive for diverse hiring. In some ways, I'd say the hiring is maybe not easy, but it's more direct, it's simple. The challenging thing is actually supporting them. Showing equity and actually driving for inclusion in your organization once you actually have a diverse talent pool. And what I would say is that's where the mechanisms really come into play. Before that, you have to make sure that there is a strong thesis and a perspective of your organization. I believe you mentioned earlier, Penelope, around the importance of mission. I would say the importance of having a mental model that really suggests who we are, what do we do, and why do we do it. One way that you could look at Amazon through the guise of our leadership principles. If you go and you really think deeply about what does it mean to have an inclusive environment, an inclusive team, I'd actually say that there's a leadership principle that aligns really closely to that. We call it have backbone, disagree, and commit. And this is effectively a principle that, when I say leadership principle, by the way, I mean every single individual inside of Amazon. They're all leaders. And our belief is that we actually need our leaders to be able to disagree and commit. They have to be passionate about really owning a position when necessary, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's incredibly uncomfortable in some cases. And so what I would say is the reason why this comes before the mechanism is because this has to be a position or perspective that's held universally. It's a mental model. It's a shared belief. And so I would say, with that in mind, the first thing that we really looked to do internally was to make sure that we were leaving space for people, leaving space inside of a conversation. This is where the challenge comes in. If you really think about building a team and you say, hey, look, I'm going to make sure that everyone in this group has a voice. We're going to make a decision. Our car's going down the street and we have to make a decision if we're turning left or we're turning right. The road is almost coming to an end. We got to turn left or right. Normally, I make the decision, I'm going to turn left. Instead, I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause. Let's ask 10 people, what position? What should we turn left or should we turn right? And so I'd say the biggest challenge of really building an inclusive environment, and I would say there's a really good upside to this, but the challenge is, at least on the outside, it might look like that it slows down your ability to make decisions quickly, velocity in decision making. And this is why, once again, I go back to making sure that you have the right culture in place and you have the right principles. We really pride ourselves on making sure that we hand down ownership and authority to the edge where possible, and also get really clear about what our decisions that are what we would consider a one-way door decision or a two-way door decision. Two-way door decision means we can go through that door, we can come right back through if we don't like the outcome, and we can change it. That's really critical to make sure that a group of people understands, because that's actually empowering for them. It's empowering because my voice is going to be heard. We're all empowered to move really fast to make a decision. And ultimately, I think what it leads to is you actually are coaching and teaching your organization how to move faster. And so I'd say that's one of the biggest challenges, I would say at least a pratfall that you might hear, that I think is easily remedied.
It's a really good point. A couple of points there. This sort of fear of losing speed. And as you say, velocity, sometimes forces people to ignore and just move on. But it's important to pause, take that moment, and sort of include people in the thought process. The other thing I sort of want to just touch on, in terms of what you just said, Jason, is the Amazon principles. I absolutely love how they're stated up front for people coming into the company, knowing what the culture is anchored on, actually helps create this feeling of being empowered to have a bit of a backbone, and not to be perhaps afraid if a leader was to disagree with you. I mean, you know that that's part of the principles, so you go in there knowing that they could disagree.
And Andy, to your point, I would say, if Penelope mentioned this earlier, the importance of mission. The importance and value, or the importance of a mission in the general term, is that it is a priority. All of us have a singular view on it. We are all signed up for this, right?
Yeah.
I would say the same thing is true of tenets or leadership principles. Yeah. Everyone believes this to be true, and we really hold ourselves accountable to it over a period of time. And if you don't get that, I think the challenge that you have is, you can make the space. You can make the space for people, and they may not take it. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. Not all of them are that they feel uncomfortable, but you do have to make sure that you're creating a culture where you're really living what you're saying. And if you don't, it might just show up in a lot of unique ways. I will tell you, Penelope, you mentioned this. There's a number of ways that we actually assess the data, qualitatively and quantitatively. In a sense, what we really are trying to figure out is, how do we show up? How do we show up, and how do we show up better for our employees? One of the ways that we do that is actually a tool. It's a mechanism that we built years ago. It's something called Connections, and it's something that we have internal. Every day, every Amazonian employee gets asked a question, and we capture all of that insight, obviously de-identified, but it gives us a baseline and an understanding around how we're showing up, both from job satisfaction, manager satisfaction, issues related to feeling as if you're in an equitable scenario. Do you feel like you're included in a part of your team? And that gives us a great deal of insight for which we can then make decisions on.
Fantastic, thanks for that. Marykay, you're leading the charge in driving Pearson into the future here. And with that, driving and leading a diverse workforce in an inclusive environment, you would have gone through some of the challenges in setting up this sort of inclusive culture. And I wonder if you could share with our listeners here some of the challenges in terms of setting up this inclusive culture. As Jason touched on, perhaps a loss of speed, but love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm just going to tell a story about what we did during COVID, okay? And then I'll talk about, what we've learned from that. So when everybody went out suddenly, obviously, we were all working from home, it became an opportunity for us to look at things a little bit differently. And one of the things that we decided to do is use the opportunity to take the people that were working in one specific division in Australia versus Sri Lanka versus headquarters, and try to put some teams together to focus on innovating and solving some problems. So we kind of created this Shark Tank kind of competition, and we made sure that your backgrounds were all different, you came in from a different perspective, so that you could learn from each other, and you could actually start solving problems. So we put 4 teams together, and it was 4 teams, 4 problems, 4 weeks. And so we were very conscious to make sure that we were very agile in the approach. And it's amazing. We thought we were just going to do this one time. And we did it, I think we had 5 cohorts already of this. And we had a Shark Tank kind of judges going. And what ended up happening is people from a diverse perspective solved problems very differently. And so it's easy to sell when you say, for example, our first winners were, they created AWS in a box for a school system in Minnesota that was struggling and with their technology landscape. And it's really gone far. We did an online tutoring product for our virtual schools. So when you start tying that to revenue and you can see how people can come together to really drive innovation and drive different ideas, it's an easy sell. It really is. And you can make it fun too. But I don't think that, the only other thing I would say about selling it is don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Like 4 teams, 4 weeks, trying to not start an intern program. We started with 10, now we're up to 50. Over a period of years, we're trying to track the new grads. You have to start small and then kind of prove yourself in.
That's a really good point. It's in fact, probably one of those biggest challenges where people fail to start because they think that the challenge is so big, and that they sort of are paused in terms of doing anything. What you guys did in terms of defining a small ring-fenced initiative, not just showed them or said what needed to be done. You actually showed how to do it. So hats off to you, and that's a good takeaway. Jason, we've covered a lot of ground, and companies today are, as we touched on at the beginning, facing significant pressure to transform and redefine themselves. And you work in one of the most innovative companies out there, and you lead a sector in US West, home to a good number of innovative companies in the globe. How are you and your team truly embedding DEI into your everyday work, so that it's not just a sort of +1 initiative, but it really is a core part of the mechanisms that your team employs on a daily basis?
Sure. Thanks, Andy. And I would tell you, first off, there's probably fewer greater risks than, I would say, really not embedding DEI as a core priority for an organization. I would say this is binary. Either you do or you don't go down this pathway. And I think the risk is, if an organization doesn't show that this is of critical importance and a priority, I think you risk being a bit performative, quite frankly. What I would say is the way that we've really embraced this is to ensure that our view on ID&E is a business priority. For the business that I lead, there are 5 priorities that we have across our organization, and that is one of those. It gets equal weighting, equal state. So when we think about our rhythm of the business, when we think about any of the cadence assessments that we do, when we think about KPIs that we're setting, OKRs, we really set and measure ourselves and assess ourselves against that the same way as we would the importance of accelerating migrations for our customers. And the reason, of course, is because we know that if we're successful here, we're going to deliver better outcomes for our employees, for our organization, and for our customers. So that's the first thing. You actually have to embed it into everything that you do. It has to be a part of the rhythm of the business. A perfect example, each month we come together as a team, and there is a broad group that focuses on a number of ID&E work streams in our organization. And that is focused on everything from our recruiting efforts, employees, our partners, our communities. And so, the question is how do you get from big ideas to action? Well, what I would say is what gets managed or what gets measured gets managed. And so you actually have to have a set of targets and goals that you're setting for yourselves that are really impactful to the folks both inside the organization and outside of the organization. So we have a regular cadence of assessing that, understanding where are we seeing success, where do we have gaps or challenges, and also making sure that we learn from so many other teams across AWS and Amazon broadly. I would say that the only way, or I shouldn't say the only, but one of the ways to have more good ideas is to have more total ideas. And I'm sure at AWS, the same way at Pearson and at Accenture, we've got some very creative employees that come up with great ideas and thoughts around how we can make our customers' lives better. So making sure that you make the space for them and really build that in as a mechanism that you can assess and really iterate on over time, I think it's just critically important.
Yeah, indeed, and you take it as a mechanism, it matters, so you measure it, and you go from there. So a really good point. And Penelope, if I was to turn to you, we in Accenture, really do measure, and we state, and we're publicly out there stating our numbers, and we've done that for a good number of years. But there is indication, just in general in industry, that there's a loss of talent in middle management. There's sort of this diverse workforce, and there isn't enough talent coming through into middle management and then onward into upper management, into leadership ranks, in order to sort of continue to drive the change and bring the value. We've got a number of things happening in Accenture, and I wondered if you would just share with the group the types of things your team is doing, Accenture at large is doing, to bring talent along and give talent the opportunities to sort of excel and grow their careers.
I think there are two important thrusts of that kind of work, Andy. The first and the most important is people are good, right? At the core, they're good, and they want to do the right thing, but they're also busy. And when you've got a lot of busy people who are in positions of power, the way that you get them to behave in a certain way, such as to pay attention to diversity metrics and to bring the next generation of diverse leaders up, is to incent and reward them. You cut through the noise of busy by making priorities, to your point, right? And metrics aligned to those priorities that actually impact their performance as a leader, and they will pay attention. But that gets the ball rolling. There has to be meat on the bone to make it keep rolling. And so the second part of the way that you tackle it is that you have to back up those metrics and incentives with a set of programs that actively deliver content and experiences to the people you're seeking to bring forward that they find engaging and they would choose to be a part of. So as a company that operates across the globe, we have one of these programs in every culture in the world that's culturally tuned for the local dimension. But I'll give you one that I went through that I found incredibly valuable. We have something called the Women Executive Leadership Development Program. And what it does is take really talented women who've delivered a lot of service to the firm, but maybe are in a specific place in the company where they don't have as much visibility to the whole picture. And they pull them up and they do sessions with the entire C-suite of the company so that each woman, and I went through this, viscerally gets to know every leader they work for and to forge these relationships where you can have open and honest dialogue about what you want out of your career. And I'm very convinced that's how I went from doing a global role and being in Malaysia doing my CIO interview to becoming the CIO of Accenture, is that I was pulled into one of these programs. I got broader exposure to the band of leaders. I talked with them about what they thought I might be good at and where I could contribute. And as a group, they guided me into this role. So it works when it's done properly. So you got to get the leadership team invested with incentive, metrics, rewards, and then you got to deliver the content underneath it that makes the people want to participate and stick, and those two things together are super powerful.
Love it, and you're absolutely right. I think, getting leadership engaged and, active really, really matters. Marykay, we've got a lot of diversity in the group here with us today, and companies perhaps in different stages of their life cycle in terms of where they are in their ID&E efforts. And I wonder if you would share maybe some advice to some of them in terms of just some of the experiences you've seen as sort of Pearson has, gone through its journey.
I'm just thinking about this now. I think one of the key things to watch out for when you start off a DEI initiative is, everybody needs a sponsor, an executive sponsor, and I think that's a very key decision and the leadership within any kind of initiative, because the individuals have to really earn the ability to lead the team. They have to be passionate, or everybody will see right through it and think of it as more or less a check-the-box exercise, and this is something I'm doing because it's important to my CEO, rather than I'm really passionate about it and I want to make a difference and I can see the value for the company. So that's one thing. I think another is, I think I already mentioned it, start small, right? Get some wins, right? Measure, get wins, make sure there are incentives in place, and make sure that you're measuring too. I think, Jason, you mentioned that too. Those are all things that are very important, because then you kind of gain confidence and you think, okay, we used to be here and now we're here and we're really making a difference in what we're doing. And then everybody gets much more excited about it and passionate about it, and then leaders are starting to fight over who can sponsor it, right? And I think it can really be a very positive thing, but it has to be from the heart. It can't be from a PowerPoint slide.
I love those 2 points. One, it has to be from the heart. I mean, people do tend to see through, if somebody's saying something but doesn't quite believe it. And live it, and so you're right. I mean, it has to, be from the heart and be genuine. I also absolutely love the point of start small. I mean, small wins matter, not just because it's a win, but it actually shows people the template and the path forward. As we now sort of, take stock, I wanted to maybe share and ask all of you just one final question. For the audience leaving here, we've covered a lot of ground today in terms of all the various questions on how a diverse workforce can operate in an inclusive environment with equity to drive greater value and feel empowered to innovate. But what would you perhaps leave the audience with if they were to walk out one thing or two that you feel it would be good for them to take home into to their next chapters? Penelope, maybe if I start with you.
Really super simply, it starts with you. And when you say that, a lot of people say, how can it start with me? I only have a team of 2 people, or I'm an independent worker and I do this and I do that. It starts with you, because if you live it and others see you live it, they will follow. So don't think about, kind of to your point about starting small, don't think about knocking down the wall on your first kick. Think about how to knock out one brick. Think about one team that you lead or one effort that you coordinate. It doesn't have to be professional. It can also be community, right? It can be at your church. It can be with your family. But make a deliberate effort as the leader in that space to employ good DEI, to think about the value of diverse thought and opinion in the outcome of whatever it is you're trying to do, and make it happen. You've got the power, right? And from that, it starts to flow to you and become much more of an ingrained behavior. And as you do, like I did, you rise in your career and your authority level expands and you have a lot more influence than you used to, the principle is naturally there and you'll reach for it and employ it in everything you do. So it starts with you. Find a place to make it happen and make it happen.
Absolutely have to say I love that point. It takes me back a few years when we, as Accenture, had this sort of inclusion starts with I. And you're absolutely right. So, you know, inclusion starts with I, and it starts with you, and that's a good takeaway message. Marykay, if I maybe just asked you, you know, to impart some words of wisdom here for the audience.
I completely agree with everything you said, so I don't want to repeat it. It does start with individuals. As leaders, like I said, be authentic, be real, be transparent. If something's not working, don't worry about calling it out. Don't worry about getting the feedback. As Jason said, like that, you know, it happens so easily in AWS. And readjust. And I guess the last parting thought is just try to cast a very wide net when you're looking for individuals or talent in a specific, for a specific role. It doesn't have to be the exact background or have all the technical skills. And be open to looking at different people and what they can bring to an organization and to a role.
The casting the net makes, it pops this concept of proximity bias in my mind, where a lot of people tend to always work with the network they've always worked with. It's the network that's close, it's close proximity. And this sort of cast the net concept that you just touched on there, Marykay, is real powerful. I'm certainly going to take that away, because you cast the net to a wider network, and you get a wider set of ideas, a wider set of innovative ideas that can drive greater value. So thanks for that. Jason, on the far side, if you wouldn't mind, one thing you think that you'd like the audience to go away with.
Yeah, first, Andy, I'll back up to something that you said, the importance of casting a wide net. Particularly, I think that's so prescient if you think about recruiting. You know, think about, I'll give you a bonus takeaway. One is, go back and think about how your organizations are recruiting talent. And is the way you're recruiting talent across many different pools? How heavily are you leveraging referrals, as an example? You could imagine that most people refer people that are somewhat similar to them. Either they've been at similar companies, they've been at other companies in the past, they went to school with them. There's lots of different scenarios. So I think if you want to create a very diverse organization over a period of time, you have to start with recruiting and hiring and really carry that through. Now, to your point around a big takeaway, so I would probably just leave the audience and say, really, if you think about diversity for your teams, if you think about creating an inclusive environment, providing equity, it matters, and it's not just going to matter for your teams. It's actually going to matter for your customers. It's going to matter for your business overall. And I'd say the way that it shows up most often for us is in the deliverable. It shows up in the speed of the deliverable. It shows up in the breadth of what we're positioning to our customers. And so to your earlier point, there is business value in that. And I would also say, as Penelope said, it's also the right thing to do.
Thanks, Jason. And it's maybe left to me just to really thank you all, not just for joining me on stage today over the last hour, but for everything that you're doing as leaders in your respective companies, in leading the way, in serving almost as what we call culture makers, to demonstrate and fly the flag on ID&E efforts and the value that it can drive, not just for the company, but for our employees, our partners, the communities, and society at large. So thank you all so much. I'm really pleased to spend time with you, and I thank you for what you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also very much for your time in joining us today to explore how we believe, and we hope how you perhaps also believe, diverse workforces operating in a culture of inclusivity and equity can serve as the enabler for businesses seeking that durable edge, that durable competitive edge to be a winner of tomorrow. We encourage you all to go away and continue flying the flag and driving for ID&E and greater ID&E efforts in your companies. Once again, thank you all so much. Thank you.